Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. So this is the main event. Is that too loud? There you go. Well, I can't control that. This is the main event. And thank you for sticking around for this. And actually, thank you for coming here today. This is a wonderful event in its 57th year. And the University of Colorado Leeds School of Business Research Division puts together their economic outlook and economic forecast. And for most of those years, we've had the opportunity to dial in a bit into real estate, which is a very important part of not just the US economy, but particularly the Colorado economy, and give you a little bit of insight into what's going on in the real estate sector and what's likely to happen. And today we'll take a little bit of a deep dive into some of the nuanced activities in the real estate sector nationally and in Colorado. So let me just start by saying thank you to the University of Colorado and Leeds for hosting this event. As I mentioned, now in its 57th year. Congratulations to Rich Wobekind and Brian Lewandowski and their team at CU's Business Research Division for once again completing this monumental forecasting task and creating this tool. And also thank you to my panelists, Cindy, Tommy, and Daryl, and I'll introduce them a bit more in a moment. I also want to acknowledge Karen Klerman, who's with First National Bank of Omaha, and Todd Guthrie, who's the president of W.E. O'Neill Construction. Both of them have COVID. And today I was informed that they would, by them, that they didn't really feel like coming here and doing it, and we all took a poll and said that's just fine. You can stay home and watch this live stream. So, but they've been involved with this panel since the very beginning and putting together the thoughts, and we have the benefit of their input. So thank you to them as well, and I'm sorry that they couldn't be here. Also, I want to thank my colleague, Matt Fleming, who's the Executive Director of the Burrage Center for Finance, who's worked with us on this panel, which is a real estate and finance panel. So my name is Mike Kercheval, and I'm the Executive Director of the CU Real Estate Center. And I come not from an academic background, but from an industry background. So for me, it is a pleasure to have this opportunity to be with industry colleagues and peers talking to all of you today about real estate. So this afternoon, we're going to take a look at what I've described as the silver lining of the supply chain situation. But also, we're not going to spend all of our time on that. We're going to take a look at the Colorado, the national, and even international real estate markets. We want to see what's happening today in those markets, and we want to take a look at the outlook for the real estate markets. And we're going to look at the markets both as from a user perspective as well as an investor perspective. Real estate is an important investment asset class, just as important as it is as a factor of production, a place where things can be done. Our panelists include today Cindy Thomas. Cindy Thomas is the Managing Director of Institutional Advisory Services at RC Elco. And Cindy, prior to that job, was an executive vice president and partner at Etkin Johnson. In her current role, she is right at the center of what's going on in the institutional real estate investing side. And so she's seeing where the big money is flowing, long-term money from pension funds, how they're looking at real estate in Colorado, nationally, and even some insights into the international markets. Pension funds are a major source of real estate capital and a major investor in the real estate side. Cindy has an MBA and a Master's of Science in Finance from the University of Colorado, and she has a bachelor's degree in real estate from the University of Wisconsin. And currently, Cindy Thomas is the chair of the International Advisory Board of the University of Colorado Real Estate Center. Cindy, thank you very much for joining us today. To her left, your right, is Tommy Dirks. Tommy is Senior Vice President at Trammell Crow Company. And Tommy is at the center of what's going on in the industrial market. He spent his entire career in that sector of the real estate industry. Most recently, he was on the West Coast, where he was involved in the development of millions of square feet of industrial and warehouse space in the Inland Empire, in Las Vegas, and in other markets. Prior to working at Trammell Crow, he worked at Prologis, and then in the middle, he received an MBA at USC and has a bachelor's degree in business from the University of Colorado. Daryl Jones, anchoring the end of the table with us. Daryl is a Senior Vice President of Coventry Development Corporation. You may know Coventry as the developers of Ridgegate in South Denver, a master plan community. And Daryl's role with the company itself, they're master plan developers. They have clearly the project in Colorado, in Houston, and a couple of other long-term markets that they are involved in around the country. Daryl rejoined Coventry after working 5 years, half a decade as the chief real estate officer at Denver International Airport. And so Daryl is bringing not only the perspective of a master plan developer, but also he offered to give some perspectives on Denver as a market and the importance of international trade and international business and capital flows into Denver as a result of that. Daryl holds a master's degree in city planning from MIT and a bachelor's of landscape architecture from Berkeley. Daryl is also a member of the International Advisory Board of the University of Colorado Real Estate Center. So thank you for the three of you for joining us today. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you. This really is an auspicious time to talk about real estate in Colorado. You heard some of the information in the forecast. We're going to go a little bit behind the scene and talk about what might be driving it. You know, just a few years ago, we were in this room talking about the big deal. It was blockchain, and everybody was talking about blockchain. I don't know who's talking about blockchain as a major mover of the real estate sector today, but that was what everybody was buzzing about then. Then we had a session where we talked about the demise of retail, and retail is dead. And as you heard and saw, retail's not dead. It's one of the growing sectors in the Colorado economy, but it has certainly transformed from the way we looked at retail 3, 4, and 5 years ago. We also, ironically, were talking about an oversupply of housing in the Colorado market, that there's too much being built, and that's going to create a supply problem, and that's going to be devastating to the real estate sector. And also just last year, we were talking about the trade wars and how that was having an impact on the real estate sector. So there's always something going on. And in fact, last year, we spent a lot of time talking about COVID and how that's going to empty our cities and radically transform the real estate industry. So this year, yes, brings a whole new set of worries, but I can tell you that where there's a worry in the real estate industry, there's usually a way. And where there's a way around the worry, there's usually an opportunity. So this afternoon, what we're going to do is we're going to parse 4 key topics from a supply and demand perspective, an investor viewpoint, and a capital markets angle on the real estate side. We're going to look at the current real estate market. Where are we today? How did we get here? What's going on in the real estate market? Then we're going to look at real estate capital markets. Is money flowing into or out of real estate? Who are the players in the real estate market? And what are the big players, the institutional money, thinking about real estate and where they should invest in real estate, if more or less in real estate? Then we'll segue into how the supply chain is impacting real estate. The downsides are very real, but there's some positive upsides that are impacting the real estate industry. And last, we're going to take a look at the future. What's the outlook for real estate locally, nationally, and globally? So let's get started with our panelists today. You know, we've heard a lot about the residential real estate market, which is very hot, and people buying and selling homes. You saw some of the dramatic increases in home prices that Professor Wobbekin and his research was showing. But also we're seeing this on the commercial side. Nationally, demand is driven. Industrial prices up 25% and by 45% in the Denver market, just as one point of observation. So in taking kind of leading off our panel, I want to ask the question, what are the challenges that we're facing right now in the real estate industry? And maybe, Tommy, from your perspective, you can kick off that question. What are the challenges we're facing right now?
Sure, be happy to, Mike, and hopefully everyone can hear me. But I think labor really is the biggest one. And for me, I can think of labor really across three different outlets. And the first is the user side. When we're doing either a speculative or a built-to-suit project for a large, e-commerce industrial user, what's at the top of their list is labor. They need to know they have qualified workers there. They have dedicated labor analytics groups. Every brokerage firm that's out there right now needs to study labor to make sure that there isn't sufficient supply to hire these types of people at the warehouses, because they are significant employment drivers. You could have 1,000, 2,000 people per shift out there. So we have a speculative project up in Commerce City, and I'll just call out CBRE since they have our listing on that, but they have a fantastic labor analytics group, and we actually include that in tenant RFP responses, and it's extremely valuable. And then the second factor, which Todd would have been much better suited to talk about than me, but I can touch on a little bit, is just on the construction side and the trade side. Our general contractor is as busy as they've ever been, and finding roofers, carpenters, just the people who build these buildings is extremely challenging. So that is a big issue, and construction side of these things. So it still is a heavy, intensive labor use there. And then lastly, and I'm sure everyone is seeing this up here and just in the audience, but just, at Trammell Crow or our parent company, it's really hard to find talented people now, and it's been a very stressful and chaotic past couple of years. Everyone, like I said, feels like it's busier than we've ever been, and as you grow, you need more people, and it's hard to find people. So it doesn't look like there's too many students out here, but I'd be feeling pretty good if I was a student and interested in getting into real estate, because I graduated from CU at the other end of the spectrum back in 2008, and it was a much different story back then.
Thank you. Darryl, maybe you'd like to add a little bit more color on that side, and tell us a little bit more about Coventry, because I think we know the name, but it's a little bit of an interesting company, the source of capital and what you do and your long-term perspective. So what are the challenges? Tell us about Coventry, and then some of the challenges facing the real estate industry right now.
Yeah, happy to, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. Coventry Development is a privately held master plan developer. We own assets around the country, large tracts of land. We own currently about 2,400 acres in Houston, in the North Houston market, near Spring, Texas. If you know the Woodlands of North Houston, we're next to that. We also own about another 2,800 acres in kind of Central Florida area, just kind of a hold on that property due to local politics and no growth kind of sentiment. So we're holding on that, and I'll come back to why that's important in a minute. But currently working on the Ridgegate project, about 3,500 acres here in Colorado, in Lone Tree specifically. We annexed that property into the city of Lone Tree in 99, 2000. And since that time have been implementing a shared vision really, between the city and us as developers on how to really create this city within the suburbs is kind of our tagline, or at least our operating theme of how we're going to densify development in really a suburban context, which was kind of an untried premise, I think, at the time. Now that we have 20 plus years under our belt and we've really proven this to come to fruition, we've done deals with some folks that you might know, like Cabela's. Charles Schwab has built over a 500,000 square foot campus there. Skyridge Hospital, almost 1 million square foot. Target. But within that, a number of residential communities, both for rent and for sale. And so our vision is really a long-term vision because, as I mentioned, we're a privately held company and wealthy family money. And so the perspective really is to hand down this asset generationally, as well as adding value with each transaction, with each real estate transaction. And so we're not in any rush to do to sell land just to retire debt. We really don't have any debt. So property has been held for a long time and very patient capital. So some of our challenges currently, as a master developer, we've had to also create a metropolitan district. And so that district is responsible for all the trunk infrastructure. So as we have now in this COVID supply chain era, our vendors will bid on a project, they'll win the bid, and so there's a fixed price. But that price has been escalated by a number of things that we can't control, such as a freeze in Texas that increased oil prices and our PVC pipes for water and sewer. All the sexy stuff for those of us who are in infrastructure, that's really sexy stuff. You need water pipes, you need sewer pipes. You need all of that stuff to go in the ground before you can see anything come out of the ground. And so our vendors are struggling with issues of just having fittings to connect the pipes together, or gate valves still on boats out in the harbor and off of California shore. So how do we operate these pipes? So those continue to be issues. And as Tommy said, labor is also important. I hear these anecdotal stories from our partners about you hire someone, it costs real money and time to train that person. They get on the job for a week and then decide, this is not for me. It's too much work. You want me to come to work from when to when? Really? I can do something else. So, so you're constantly churning over that cost of training someone. That's a real expense. And so I would just echo Tommy's comments. Labor, certainly, and supply of just basic infrastructure to get projects out of the ground are really taxing us right now.
I'm going to come back to both of you, but I want to get Cindy's perspective on this as well. And I think it'd be useful also just to talk a little bit about who is RCLCO.
Sure. So RCLCO Fund Advisors is a subsidiary of RCLCO. The company's been in business for over 50 years, really known traditionally for real estate economics work. But coming out of the great financial crisis, saw a need to partner with institutional investors and advise them on their real estate allocations in their portfolios. So boring story, not for LP investors, but a lot of them caught in the last recession in closed-end commingled funds and weren't able to pull their money out when they needed it to invest in other areas. So we advise mainly on joint ventures with operators like Trammell Crow, separate accounts where the limited partners have a little bit more control over their destiny per se, and how they move forward. So we have today about 75 billion of assets under advisement. We work with 10 plus of the largest public pension funds here in the United States, as well as international investors, and really are lucky enough to advise them on their allocations into real estate. So obviously they have a choice. They can allocate, to public equities, private capital, real estate infrastructure, et cetera. So we focus on real estate for them, and then help to advise them on who they invest with, the different investment managers or operators, what that allocation looks like, and then all the way down to the assets that they invest in and how long they hold for. So when you ask me the question about the biggest challenges, I would say generally overall, we're not known in the real estate industry for our innovation, and I think that lack of innovation and really just reactionary response to COVID has gotten us into some trouble here. So there were trends that were already apparent, right? Sector-based challenges within place-based retail, the rise in industrial use, especially last mile, demographic shifts leading to that were already going to lead to the migration of millennials from the city center into the suburbs. And so we have this disruption, this major shock of COVID, and really just an acceleration then of those trends. So when we talk about retail, what does it mean? We can talk a little bit about this later, but you really have to bifurcate retail. Like malls are different than grocery anchored, and they're going to react differently. Industrial, they're obviously having their moment, but we favor just-in-time inventory. If you were all here earlier today, we were talking a lot about that, but what does that mean for our industrial space today? and then housing. So most will argue that our housing starts didn't keep up with demand, but as Mike mentioned, maybe a year or two ago, we thought we were going to oversupply, right? So I guess we had that wrong. And at the same time, you have all this demand for single-family housing. You also have large institutional investors that are creating purpose-built single-family rental and taking single-family product off the market for like the individuals, right? And then I'll just echo what everyone else has said here. It's this, idea of like, where did all the people go? And how do we? There's a real shift of talent between sectors. Like, for instance, we're seeing hospitality workers that were traditionally in that sector moving to, e-commerce, where they might not love their job, but they get paid better and have benefits and get sent to school.
It's interesting. None of you mentioned, and just kind of reflecting back on the last 5 years when we've talked about the biggest challenges, among those mentioned were NIMBYism. We can't get any permits. The government is in our way. Everything's blocked because of the EPA. Nobody mentioned that right now as being a challenge. Are those not challenges, or we just don't care?
I'm glad I don't live in California anymore. That's all I'd say, for multiple reasons, but everything you mentioned on there was, from my perspective, more of an issue in California than it is in Colorado.
Well, I didn't mention it because it's not currently a challenge of ours in particular. We have a great relationship with the city of Lone Tree. We work with the public officials all the time. We give them advance notice on anything that's might be controversial from a resident standpoint. And so from that standpoint, we have been very fortunate. That's not always the case. A good portion of my career actually has been working in the public sector. I'm the guy behind the counter saying, no, you can't do that, you can't do that. So on the regulation side, from a zoning and development standpoint, I'm reformed, sir. I see you shaking your head. I'm reformed. I'm one of the private sector now. But it is a very real issue. I was previously on the city council of Greenwood Village as well. And so they're one of the cities that really had concerns with the amount of growth in Colorado, the amount of traffic impacting their community, and they're not unique. There are a number of cities around the metro area, Lakewood and others, that are concerned about this issue, and so entitlements and really getting time to market is a real issue. If you don't know what to expect in terms of either exactions, what it's going to cost you, or how long it's going to take to get your permits, that is a real issue. And so that is currently an ongoing, I say, and growing concern as well. So while I didn't mention it in our particular context, very much a real issue today as well.
Well, thank you, and I will share Todd Guthrie from O'Neill Construction. When we asked him that question, and he said, it's just getting stuff. And he said, if you're building homes, it's not just getting the lumber, but it's also getting the appliances and trying to figure out the timing when everything is delayed. And you can't really, I think if somebody even said, can you warehouse dump this stuff someplace and kind of over inventory? And well, there's no place to put it. There's no empty warehouse space even to put washing machines if you could get a load of 100 washing machines to do a development. So he was commenting labor, yes, probably number one, but number two, just getting construction materials and supplies and then everything that goes into the buildings. There's such a backlog on that. But he too did not, he didn't go after the public sector and say that they're holding us up this time. In fact, it seems, and anecdotally, like there's certainly in Colorado, there's a little bit of support to keep the economy moving and doing the right thing, we think the right thing. In keeping the real estate sector strong. So related to that, let me just shift to capital markets a bit, because people always say follow the money and that'll tell you what's going on. And it's been for us, I think, a real interesting conundrum that prices have to go down. They can't keep going up. And finally, when interest rates went up, and it was just pointed out a couple hours ago with the rise in interest rates, well, finally, we're going to see a shift in the pricing, and we're going to see real estate prices not continue to rise. But I don't know if that's really true yet. And maybe I'll turn to you first, Cindy, and get your perspective on capital markets, where is money flowing from, and where's it going to? What is going on with this pricing?
Yeah, it's really aggressive out there. There is a lot of dry capital, right, sitting on the sidelines waiting to invest in deals on the institutional side. So when we talk about institutional money, we're really talking about public-private pension funds, sovereign wealth funds that are investing here in the US, endowments, and insurance companies. And they've all been pretty consistently increasing their allocation to real estate as an asset class over the past, since we started tracking, really. And on average, they're at about 11% of their allocation today, going into 2022. But that varies widely depending on what type of institutional investor you're talking to. So it can be as low as 7% or upwards of 30%. And public pension funds and sovereign wealth funds are typically leading the pack. So today, when you think about, well, why go after real estate when the pricing is so aggressive? And they're essentially under allocated to real estate by 140 basis points, which is the widest margin that they've been under allocated, again, since we started tracking. So why is that? So first, there was a slowdown in investment in the months that occurred right after the pandemic, where everybody just stopped and said, what are we doing here? There were no deals on the market and nobody was transacting. But pretty quickly after that, as we all know, public equities came back. Private equity is returning all-time highs, right? So you have a denominator problem here where you end up being underallocated to real estate because of what's going on in the other asset classes. And so how are they looking to deploy that capital? I mean, multifamily and industrial are still feel like pretty safe bets, but I would say that institutional investors are getting way more savvy as it relates to niche strategies. So life science in a big way. Again, purpose-built single-family rentals. So taking a portion of an MPC, carving it out, and creating a single-family for rent communities for people that can then, who can't afford to buy a house but can live in the same communities as everyone else, go to the best schools, et cetera. So. And then and self-storage and senior housing, which senior housing still has, pretty strong demographic trends that are supporting it, notwithstanding some of the headline risks that occurred throughout COVID.
Just can you talk a little bit about what's hot in Colorado in terms of that? You mentioned a lot of asset types and MPC, master plan communities.
Right.
Is that what that is? Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
So are storage and senior housing, is that hot? Are those hot in Colorado, or is Colorado unique? There's something special about Colorado?
No, I don't think so. That's probably more national trends, and maybe you can speak a little bit to industrial and what you have going on here. But I would say, in most markets, Colorado included, residential, so be it multifamily or single family, or industrial are still, the leaders of the pack.
Yeah, and just on the industrial side, and I guess I could just give a quick summary of Trammell Crow because we've been around for a while, but right now we're the largest and I think oldest developer in the United States. We were founded in Dallas by a gentleman who was actually Mr. Trammell Crow right after World War II, and he actually invented speculative industrial development. So he built the first speculative industrial project, I think in 1948. And so we've had multiple iterations over the past, however many years that is, 75, 80 years, but have been operating in the Denver area for the past 60 or so years. And I'm primarily focused on our industrial business. And I mean, the capital that Cindy just mentioned has definitely had a huge impact on land prices. And to Daryl's point, when you don't know, how long it's going to take and what it's going to cost to get your entitlements, we're structured as a merchant builder, so we partner with long-term institutional capital, and they're the long-term holders on our joint venture deals. We also work on a fee basis where whoever would just hire us to develop a project. But when you are seeing some of these land prices coupled with taking on that entitlement uncertainty and risk, that's what gives me a lot of heartburn because you can figure out, you know, the technical stuff and getting it out of the ground. But when you don't know if your entitlement's taken a year or 2 years, you don't have a pro forma to put together there. So as just one example, I mentioned our speculative project that's right at I-76 and 104th in Commerce City. Our land basis is $4 a foot, and we closed on that about a year and a half ago, zoned by right industrial. And now, you know, there's competing projects that have land basis that's 4 or 5 times our project without having entitlements. So, you know, that's just one anecdotal example that I've seen where that capital flocking to Colorado for industrial is a real thing. You're also seeing a lot of, or from my perspective, a lot more forward sales where institutions are buying just completed buildings without any tenants in there. So from what I've gathered, I think the strategy is they're taking away the construction risk and supply chain risk and just knowing they have a completed building that really all they have to do is lease it, and the demand is so strong right now. That's not a concern, which is, you know, a big change from 5 or 6 years ago. You're always worried about if you're hitting your leasing pro forma. Now you're worried if you can get it built on time and on budget.
So you mentioned that and thank you for telling us about Trammell Crow Company, my bad there.
No, that's right.
So you mentioned that you have the same sort of pension fund investors who are funding your deals and the like. And I think, Darryl, when we were speaking earlier, you talked a little bit about foreign direct investment coming into Colorado. Is that going into real estate also?
Yeah, that's the hope, and really that was in the context of my role as the chief real estate officer at the airport. We were actually trying to attract capital from Asia, the Asian markets. There's just a lot of capital there, and they're looking to invest here, but typically more in known assets, less so in what we were trying to initiate, which was really investment in infrastructure, which we thought was kind of a unique way to frame the question of direct investment. But we were working in partnership with the Denver Office of Economic Development, and they were actually trying to attract business. And so really there was a lot of synergy between business development and investment in capital, foreign direct investment of capital, because as the airport expanded its flight offerings, direct nonstop flights internationally, we were also trying to make that linkage between, okay, if I can fly direct to Munich, Germany, is there also a German company that wants to headquarter here in Colorado because of all the great things that we have to offer? So there was really a lot of synergy between direct flights, direct investment, and placement of office buildings. So that happened more in that context, not currently what I'm doing as much.
So that was, I know it was 2 years ago, we were talking about the companies moving to Colorado and who are the new tenants who are taking all this space. And that was a big part of it, seeing if there were international companies. And I think there were several that did. Partner Group was one example from Switzerland that we saw coming and moving their headquarters, if you will, consolidating it into Colorado. Tommy, I wonder if I could just kind of push you out on a limb a little bit. And so I want to know what's going on with the office market. And since you're not in the middle of it, you can say whatever you want. But I know that your company has a pretty wide and your exposure platform. We heard today that the Denver office market vacancy was almost 20%. And in contrast, the retail market is around 8%. And you'd even made a comment earlier that in some places in the country, not specifically Denver, that it's almost effectively zero vacancy rate in the industrial sector. You can't find the stuff. So what's happening with office? Is anybody coming back? They gone?
It's come back significantly since a year ago, I would say. I don't think we have one spec office project right now in the country. I think we are probably right on the cusp of doing one, but it would have to have a significant pre-lease component, over 50, 60%. And part of that is I don't think we could get a construction loan. I don't think any of the banks are still lending on spec office right now. But yeah, we do industrial, multifamily, and office are our 3 main food groups right now. So it has shifted more our Chicago office, as an example, has, I think, 2 speculative life science office buildings. So it's, not my expertise, but just a heavy-duty, higher TI office building. And those, I think, are right in line with industrial and multifamily. It seems like that's the hottest new flavor over the past year and a half, and I think that's going to continue. So, I think I go in the office every day. I miss not going into the office, so,
You do have a 2-year-old at home, right?
That's part of why I go in the office every day, because I can't focus at home. But, I don't think office is dead. I don't think it ever will be dead. I think, people can't mentor and teach and just interact the way that you can in person at an office building. And especially, in our business, I think it's crucial to be in person.
I will say, I think it's nuanced, right? Because there'll be a flight to quality, and whether or not that's like temporary or permanent, I don't know. But there's no doubt that you don't need to be there every day, we figured out, right? So maybe it's a hybrid approach, and you're gonna use the space differently. You just wanna be there when you collaborate, but when you have your heads downtime, I can do that at home if I have a good setup, right? I don't have a 2-year-old at home, so I'm okay. So I'm going to use it differently. So what does that mean for like Class B and Class C office space? I think there's some pain coming in that realm. But we're even looking at spec development of like high quality, highly amenitized, well-located office today. So certainly not dead.
I think in today's paper there was a story about converting office into industrial. And is that possible? Every time it seems that there's a pricing shift, we're going to convert office into multifamily and now office into industrial. Can that be done even in suburban locations, or is there a way to reduce the denominator, if you will, of the office portfolio to affect the vacancy rate by just taking some of that out and satisfying some of the industrial need? Is there any possibility of that?
That's an interesting question. I think it could be done. I think, it'd have to be a 1-story or 2-story tilt office building, kind of what Cindy said, suburban Class B or C space where it could be utilized for a last mile distribution center for, one of the many e-commerce companies out there. So, yeah, I don't see why not. You could figure out a way to make it work, I'm sure.
There you go. There's an opportunity out there in everything. Let me shift a little bit to supply chain. And not to pick on you, Tommy, but I mean, you were right in the middle of it there out where the ports are and Southern California. Is the supply chain thing in real estate just an excuse to jack up rents, or what's really going on out there with real estate supply chain?
I wish it
and
was.
warehouses?
It's such a complicated problem. And when I was in Southern California, the inbound containers is what really drove and has drove historically industrial demand. So there was always issues, whether it was port congestion was always a thing because they were always doing construction projects, or the longshoremen would always go on strike. And so you always had 1 or 2 issues, but COVID was the major wrench that kind of threw everything into the chaos that we have now. So it's not just an easy fix where you can say we're going to do this and it's all going to heal. I think what's now just starting to get a little bit of press, because I read something in the Wall Street, I think last week on it, but even if we figured out the port infrastructure, even if we figured out the labor and the longshoremen, even if we figured out the truck drivers, which is another labor issue that I forgot to mention, but we don't have enough truck drivers in the country, so we have to advance something there. And then if we figured out the chassis, there's nowhere to put it. And so Denver doesn't have the same vacancy as Southern California, but all of Southern California's industrial base is 2 billion square feet, and it's 0.5% vacant. So now you have all these issues coupled with the fact that even if these 100 ships were able to get their containers in, there literally is nowhere to put it. And that has been, you could kind of see it coming over the past 6 years, given how hard it is and all the NIMBYism. And I can say it here, not to get political, but we're not in California, but CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, really put a damper on supply. It takes 6 years to get industrial entitlements in Southern California, and you have no idea how much it's going to cost because there's extortionists out there that found the loopholes in CEQA, and you have to pay them something, you just don't know what it is. So that, you know, when a market like that has needed 30, 40 million square feet of annual new construction, has really tapered it at 15 to 20. And so that vacancy rate now is just so low because of that reason. And you're seeing markets like Las Vegas and Phoenix really be the benefactors of it because they can still get on a truck from the ports in a single day's drive to those markets and have a slightly higher industrial vacancy rate. So there is a little place to put it. Unfortunately, I don't see Denver really coming into as a beneficiary of that. Just we're too far away. But it's a very complicated problem.
If I could add on to that, Mike, you know, I agree. The trucking issue is one of the concerns that we faced because even if we can get pipe, we can't put the pipe on a truck and get the truck to drive here since it's no autonomous driving trucks right now. And so same thing, it's a labor shortage with truck drivers. And so we still face that issue, even though we're inland and we're not worried about the pipe coming off the boats, we're worried about pipe coming from a factory in Texas, but we can't get it here. So I've wondered, actually, let me ask you this, if I can, if this warehouse issue started with the passage of recreational marijuana and cannabis, because we had all these warehouses on 6th Avenue that were just grow houses, and you could smell it driving down the freeway. Did that start the warehousing issue? That's just my own theory, but you can debunk it.
I'd say no, just because e-commerce, I mean, you need 36-foot clear, and it's a different class, I would say, you know, Class B versus Class C. But on trucking, you know, I was at a conference, and the head economist at CB had what I remember is the most interesting stat. I think the average age of a truck driver in the U.S. is 58, and the average life expectancy of a truck driver in the U.S. is 59. And this was a year and a half ago.
Do the math,
Right.
Wow.
And so we need these autonomous trucks because, I mean, labor aside, just that's not a very good statistic.
No.
So it's not going to get any better. So.
Well, and to share some of Todd's comments too on this issue of supply chain, in their side, he said one thing that they're seeing is a shift, what he called, he pulled it off of Wikipedia, to reshoring, the flip side of offshoring. And if you're in the construction, the real estate industry, and you need all of these things, you're relying on one supplier offshore. We've realized the vulnerability of that. So finding manufacturers, finding producers within the United States so we don't have to put it in a container and pull it across the ocean. So a real move to reshoring and, you know, revitalizing in a way some of the manufacturing in the United States, with the caveat that it's probably not cheaper, but you have the reliability of the supply. And he also noted, and maybe Darryl, you're seeing some of this too, a change in the materials, that if you can't get the steel, because the steel prices are up 100% year over year right now for construction, that if you can't use steel, a few years ago you were shifting to steel because you couldn't get wood. And if you can't get wood and you can't get steel, what can you use? Is there concrete? Is there plastic? Are there other materials that are domestically produced that, as a result of this kind of choke point of a supply chain, that are changing the way you do construction and development?
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, and oil affects everything in the real estate industry as well. If you can't if you don't have oil for your PVC pipes, you can't have pipes. If you don't have oil, you can't build your streets because your streets have oil. So oil and those markets also affect what happens in real estate. So there's really just it's a global economy. Everything is really interrelated.
Well, I think that the kind of the question we all are wondering too, and this maybe leads us into thinking a little bit about the outlook. So put you on the spot, Cindy, when is the supply chain bottleneck for real estate over? What year and month?
It's being recorded too.
I know, right? It's being recorded.
Cindy, here's my crystal ball.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've heard, right, from very smart people, like second half of 2022. I have no idea. But there's no doubt that it's creating, you're hearing it, a huge issue as it relates to the availability of materials, the availability to get the materials to us, the lack of space in the Inland Empire. I'll add like how that all translates, right? We look at what type of return institutional investors can earn, and so we're looking at valuations. And in the Inland Empire, our benchmark, this gets boring, but our benchmark is Odyssey. It's the open-ended diversified fund. Anyway, it's our benchmark, like the S&P. And the Inland Empire Industrial was up over 50% valuations year to date. And that's, it's coming off appreciation as opposed to just income return, but it's directly tied to like the rent growth that they're achieving in that market because of the lack of supply. So by way of reference, here in Colorado, it was a 20% growth year to date. So still, pretty substantial, but second half of 2022, Mike.
Second half of 2022, do I hear a third half of
Take the over.
third quarter or?
It's going to get better, not solved, but better.
Well, and as a bit of a commentary, we were out chatting in the lobby, and a colleague out there said, this thing is just, it's not real. It was real, but we're so over it. Now it's a CNN talking point. The supply chain bottleneck and an excuse for everything else, that demand is going to slow because of inflation and it's going to self-correct. And so it's already behind us. You agree, Daryl?
Let's see, I'll take my crystal ball back now. Really not sure. Again, anecdotally, our vendors, partners are not really singing into it. It's really hard for them to predict what's going to happen, especially as they've locked in pricing on supplying materials to us for underground infrastructure, and yet those prices escalate. Now what do? I'm just going to take a loss on my profit, or what options do I have? So I'm going to stick with Cindy's estimate.
Okay,
I'm gonna
Tommy.
defer to Cindy.
Yeah, last shot to weigh in on this one.
I'll just take the over on Cindy's
All
estimate.
right, that's a good call. So, well, then I won't let you off the hook that easily. Thinking now, looking ahead, and both with regard to Colorado and nationally, what are the opportunities for the real estate industry, and which sectors, office, retail, industrial, land, residential, do you think are going to be doing well, or are going to really suffer? And maybe I'll start with you, Tommy, and if you shared a lot about industrial, and can this continue to go on?
I think absolutely on industrial. I think e-commerce is just still in its early stages, and it's such a shift in how we buy things. And it's just like, I have a 2-year-old, and I'm not going to go to Costco to buy diapers. I'm going to order them on Amazon, and I'm not going to go back to the old ways to do that. And so a lot of our tenants in Southern California, we did leases with Sam's Club and Nordstrom and Williams-Sonoma and a lot of other big e-commerce users. And when you're touring, the real estate directors, they say Amazon changed our business. Now we have to be able to deliver in 2 days or less. And so when you really think, that's a global gateway market where that just started 3 years ago. And so now you're starting to see some of the e-commerce activity here in Denver, like Lowe's is doing a very large 1 million square foot built-to-suit out by the airport. Home Depot's out here. So a lot of these other big retailers are focusing on Denver e-commerce now because they have to be here to deliver to this, whatever our population is now, 4 or 5 million people. You can't do it from Salt Lake or Phoenix. You need to have a presence here. So I think that's going to bode extremely well for our market. I think rents are going to continue to grow. I think, unfortunately, land prices are going to continue to go up. But that's where, if interest rates do rise, and I feel like people have said cap rates can't go lower for the past 5 or 6 years now, and they go lower every year. So, you know, there might be some truth to there might not be, but I think the rent growth is really gonna protect us on the industrial side from any kind of cap rate expansion, because rent growth is essentially a factor of cap rates. So I feel very confident on industrial. I'm very happy to be working in industrial. I've always liked it, and you know, from where it was 10 years ago to where it is now is pretty, or 15 years ago to where it is now is pretty astonishing, in my opinion. And then the other one that we talked about, I mean, I think life sciences in particular in Colorado is going to be.
Can you tell us what that means, life sciences?
So it means, it's a very ambiguous term. It can be essentially a flex industrial, like a 24-foot clear flex industrial building, kind of like what Edkin Johnson developed up in Colorado Tech Center, where Eli Lilly leased, you know, 150,000 square feet, and then they put in a significant amount of money, and I don't know what they do in there. I'm not from the medical side, but it can mean anywhere from that to like an 8-story office building with, you know, cell and gene therapy and these crazy exhaust fans and everything else. So I don't know if there is a distinct life sciences. It's kind of a catch-all from my perspective, but you know, I think it is gonna continue to emerge here, and just quality of life, and especially along that Boulder corridor. I think a lot of people wanna be up there. They have very highly educated, just desirable place to live workforce. So those two.
And Daryl, you're deep in the residential multifamily also. What's your outlook on that sector?
Yeah, it continues to be strong in both single family and multifamily. You know, actually, as I think about this, it kind of takes me back to 2008 when we had our builder partners, you know, kind of scrambling, what's happening here? But, you know, the research showed that Denver there was not an oversupply of housing in Denver, and so therefore we didn't have a bubble that was going to burst in the recession, unlike markets like Las Vegas or Phoenix or other places around the country. So that lack of oversupply of housing bode well for us. Unfortunately, I think that trend continued because, again, going back to labor, Cindy mentioned this, people shifted from construction and residential development to other sectors, retail and other places, and never really regained, the single-family housing industry really never really regained that labor force. And so we've continued to provide, I'd say, the housing that was essentially needed. Fast forward to today, there's a shortage and there's so much pressure on housing that prices are escalating. So we continue to see that. We have partners that are just doing the grading work, and people are bombarding them wanting to put deposit checks down on houses. They're like, we're not even open yet. And so it's just phenomenal. Likewise, in the multifamily sector, we could sell lots and land for multifamily all day. We could do that all day. And we just had to internally say this is not consistent with the amount of housing and the overall vision for our community. So we had to, you know, reach a cutoff at a certain point. But those projects are underway now. It takes time, obviously, from when you get to an LOI to a purchase agreement, get your entitlements and start construction. I mean, all that takes time, as you guys know. And we've just had to kind of slow the pipeline down on that. But there's tremendous demand and pressure on multifamily housing. That has not slowed one bit.
Okay, Cindy, I'll ask you about office. Everything seems up and up here. What's your perspective on office?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's, it's a nuanced story going forward, and there'll be a flight to quality for sure on the office front. And so, well-located, highly amenitized office space, I think will do quite well going forward. When I look out into just 2022, what we're seeing on the institutional side is, as opposed to looking at just asset class driven, we're looking at the ability to mark the rents to market quickly, in between each asset class. So self-storage, right, where rates are resetting, annually or month to month even. Multifamily, where you're getting that opportunity on an annual basis. and some industrial, you know, more like last mile, smaller spaces where the leases are shorter. There's a heavy focus there because there's a realization that long-term 10-year net leases where you're only getting maybe a 3% bump annually isn't going to keep up with inflation, at least for the short term. So there'll be a lot of demand where you can mark to market quickly.
So these smart quant people, they figured that out too. Right. I have one last question for each of you, and it's a hypothetical here. So if each of you had a discretionary $1 million to invest in real estate, where would you invest it? Like what location? And actually, I'm going to limit you to Colorado right now, just to make it interesting. And what asset class? What would you buy? And our banker, who isn't here, she said she will give you 75% loan to value on that, so you can leverage that up unless it's construction. She's going to hold you to 65%. So you can leverage that $1 million. Who wants to go first, Daryl?
Well, of course, I would locate it in Lone Tree, in Richmond. That's the best community in the entire state. I would, and actually I would invest it in aerospace because it's a growing market. One day we're going to go to the moon for a vacation, right? So everyone's investing and exploring and putting a lot of money into the technology, into the research for that. It's just such a growing industry. I have 3 kids. My middle son is a mechanical aerospace engineer and just was working at SpaceX. And Elon is like, we're going to Mars. And so really all the stuff we're doing here, all the greenhouse gas emissions, is the stuff we need to do to warm up Mars. Real tangible thing that people are investigating. And so that's where I put my money.
Okay, that's not insider information. Elon has a habit of kind of letting loose lips, but we're going to Mars.
It's common knowledge.
Okay. Tommy, where would you put your $1 million of equity, and where and in what property type?
I feel like industrial would be too easy, and it'd probably buy
It
me
would
like
be, it would be too easy.
1/10 of an acre. So I would probably say the whole built-to-rent story, I think, is interesting. And you know, I'm from here originally, and my wife's from here originally, and I never thought in a million years I'd be the Californian coming back to Colorado, but here I am. And
We're glad to have you.
Denver's just such a great place. And so word got out right after I left in 2011 that it was a great place. But that's my coulda, woulda, shoulda, because you could buy a house in the Highlands for $150,000 at the time, and now, you know, they're $1 million plus up there. So I just think that's going to continue because it is such a great place to live, and I could get a little more bang for my buck on a single family rental than I could for an industrial deal.
What sort of a return might we be looking for? Just out of curiosity. I mean, I hear you.
Yeah, probably, you know, just cash on cash, I would 6%. Cindy, what do you think?
Yeah.
You tell me.
I think stabilized.
Okay. Yeah.
So
There you go.
6%, single family rental, that's where your $1 million is going.
That's where it's going.
And,
Well, I
okay.
get leverage too, so I can.
You get the
yeah.
leverage, right. Okay, Cindy?
Well, because I'm selfish, Mike, it's going into a mountain home just for me. It's impossible to find a mountain home right now. If anybody's been trying, I don't know. I have. But I think, honestly, with this shift of we're still going back to the office. I fully agree with that, right? But we're going to work differently, and so there are opportunities to have, you know, a home up there and a home down here, and more and more people are realizing that and are going to take advantage of it. So I think it's a good long-term investment.
I think in the results we saw today about price escalation, that was like Silverthorne was one of the biggest price increases year over year. And I think for that same reason.
Right.
So if I had my $1 million, I'd give you each 1/3 of it and co-invest with you and diversify my risk. So I think that's all the time that we have. I'm happy to take any last words from any of you. And if not, I want to thank our panelists, Daryl, Tommy, and Cindy, for your insights, your wisdom, your investment advice. and taking the time to come and do this with us. And I want to thank all of you for your interest and your staying here, and those of us who are watching this live stream. And at some point in the future, the people who pulled us down on YouTube, thank you to all of you. So with that, thank you, and we have a reception out in the foyer.